In the early 70s, electronics, Silicon Valley, it was all just evolving as I was just getting into the scene. And by the middle of the decade, my day job was working with microprocessors because they came out of Silicon Valley also. At the same time, I was in San Jose, a few miles away. Emu was in an apartment in Santa Clara. Doug Curtis was working in Los Gatos at the time. Keyboard Magazine started almost in walking distance in Cupertino. So there was just so much synergy there. That was really the center of action. So I thought, oh, microprocessor, chipset, I could build a polyphonic synth and I could make it programmable because of a microprocessor. I hesitated for a few months because I thought somebody else would do it, but then when it seemed like nobody was, then I quit my job in early 1977 and started working around the clock on what became the Prophet-5. When we first showed it at the first NAMM show in 1978 in January, I remember, I don't know if I flew down or drove down with the unit, and all night the night before I was still making changes and tweaking stuff, and it barely made, I don't even think I was there when the doors opened. I think I brought it in a few hours late and there were already people waiting to see it. It was clear that it was an immediate hit. We were a tiny company, there were only a few of us, and it was like, oh shit, now we got to go back and actually build these things and then ship them. And again, I was 27, I didn't know how to run a company, I was just kind of seat of the pants the whole way, just, okay, yeah, let's do this and let's do that. And then one of the bigger problems we had was all these big musicians were just calling all the time. I have one at order and Guitar Center, and they said it's not going to be here for 6 months. Do you know who I am? And we would have loved to have been able to ship, but we had a year, 2-year backlog. We just couldn't build them fast enough for the demand. The Prophet-5 was special, the way it looked, the way it sounded, the programmability, the polyphony. For the first time, people could play chords and change sounds. And of course, as we know, ever since then, every synth that's not a mono synth is basically a version of the Prophet-5. People have been asking me to redo the Prophet-5 almost since we stopped building it in the early 80s. We talked about it once in a while, and as it turned out, when we were finishing up the Pro 3, I'd go back to my old Prophet-5 and I'd listen to all the sounds that it can make, and I go, how could something this simple sound so good and have such a wide variety of sounds? How is that possible? And, well, it's because it's a really cool synth. Just copying something, that's not so interesting, but being able to take the original to the next level. So Rev 1, Rev 2, Rev 3, and then this is the new one, a Rev 4. We're really the only people that are qualified to do that. We know what the progression should feel like. First, it's definitely a Prophet-5. Nothing ever looks like this except a Prophet-5. The basic central core of the analog signal path is exactly the same. We did start with the actual 3340 VCOs. We're buying them from on-chip systems. We collected a number of Rev 3s and a Rev 2 and a Rev 1. I think we had up to 5 of them at one point, and they were all different. So which one do you pick as a Rev 3? There were just so many little decisions like that we had to make, and people always argued about Rev 1, 2s versus Rev 3s because the filters were different. So we said, let's put in both. We still can get the original Curtis chips from on-chip systems. That was Doug's company. For the SSM 2040, the SSI had Dave Rossum design a 2140 that's an updated version of the 2040. And since Dave also designed the 2040 40 years ago, it's authentic, it's the real thing. So now you can just hit a switch and change filters. The second step was, well, that's not all there is in difference between the different units. We said, let's put a knob there and let's call it a vintage knob. Our new Prophet-5 is a Rev 4. So when you had a vintage knob at 4, everything's nice and tight. The tuning's tight, envelopes are tight, everything is, what you would expect in a modern day instrument. As you get towards 3, it starts loosening up just a little. But when you start getting to 2, and especially to 1, it's spread all over the place. And for a lot of sounds, if you're doing chords and pads, having it set around 2 really sounds awesome. We just thought, wow, I have a Rev 1, a 2, a 3, and a 4 all in one box. And it actually does that. I mean, it's really pretty fun to play with. Some of the things we added were obvious. We had to have real MIDI and USB, of course. We added where the cassette switches used to be. We now have one that's for aftertouch and one that's for velocity. And it's amazing to play a Prophet-5 with velocity. It's kind of surprised us, actually. The original Rev 1 and 2 Prophet-5s had 40 programs, and there's a lot of those sounds. You listen to it and you can go, oh yeah, that's this song, or that's this song, because it was. So of course we have those same 40 sounds in the new one. And we found that this is capable of a much wider sound palette than the originals. You can nail the original sounds, of course, because it's the same parts, but it goes way beyond that. There's a bunch of other little hidden things here and there, because we wanted it to look the same. I didn't want to add a whole bunch of extra switches and knobs. When I originally designed the Prophet-5, I designed it so it could also be a 10 voice by adding a second voice card. This time around, everything's a whole lot more efficient internally, so we can do 10 voices reliably. So now you can buy the new Prophet-5 as a Prophet-5 or a Prophet-10. It is interesting to look back at this as kind of like bookends, like Prophet-5 to Prophet-5. I just turned 70, so this is it. This is my birthday present to the world.